The drugs that show up on the streets there are coming from the cartel. It's coming from these organizations. And that's the pattern. That's the flow of drugs that we're talking about.
At 4:12 a.m., in a frozen industrial district where no one should have been awake, 284 federal agents moved through darkness toward a building the county records listed as abandoned. What they found behind its rusted doors would shatter every assumption Iowa had made about its own safety. 226 captives. Rail networks moving 4.3 tons of narcotics annually through America's heartland. Financial trails exceeding $510 million. And at the center of it all, a name that had appeared on commendation certificates for 15 years. This was not a raid on a criminal organization. This was the exposure of an empire that had been constructed inside the infrastructure of trust itself. And tonight, we are going to show you exactly how it was built, how it operated, and how it finally fell. Iowa in December carries a particular kind of silence. The fields lie dormant beneath snow. The small towns slow their rhythms. The cities move through winter routines with the confidence of communities that believe they exist beyond the reach of the violence that consumes other regions. This is the heartland. This is where people move to escape. This is where families settle because they trust that the worst of the world cannot follow them here. But trust, when it is absolute, becomes blindness. And blindness, when it is widespread, becomes opportunity. For nearly 9 years, something had been growing beneath Iowa's frozen surface. Something patient. Something systematic. Something that understood the most valuable territory is not the land that is heavily defended, but the land that believes it needs no defense at all. The first indication arrived through a channel that should have been unremarkable. A Department of Agriculture analyst reviewing subsidy distributions noticed 17 transactions that individually raised no concerns but collectively formed a pattern that triggered automated review. Each transfer fell just below federal reporting thresholds. Each recipient appeared legitimate. Each purpose seemed reasonable. But when the analyst began mapping the connections between those 17 transactions, the network that emerged made her request immediate escalation to federal investigators. What she had discovered was not fraud. It was architecture. The Sinaloa cartel had not invaded Iowa. They had been given the keys. The man who held those keys was Marcus Delacroix, Iowa's Director of Corrections and Infrastructure Oversight. For 18 years, Delacroix had built a reputation as the state's most reliable administrator. 3 governors had publicly praised his dedication to efficiency and transparency. His office walls displayed 11 professional commendations. Local newspapers featured his initiatives as models of Midwestern governance. When journalists needed a quote about criminal justice reform or infrastructure improvement, Delacroix was the call they made. He attended community events. He spoke at high school graduations. He appeared at church fundraisers with the easy confidence of a man who had nothing to hide. Federal investigators were learning to read beneath that confidence. The first anomaly appeared in construction records. A correctional facility expansion budgeted at $18.7 million had been approved, funded, and documented as complete. Inspections had been signed. Contractors had been paid. Yet the facility did not exist. The land parcel listed in official documents was an empty stretch of rural property that had never seen a foundation poured. The second anomaly was personnel-based. Employment files for 23 correctional officers showed service histories that contradicted payroll records. Some had received salaries during periods when they were listed as terminated. Others appeared on duty rosters for facilities that had been closed for years. The discrepancies were not clerical errors. They were systematic. The third anomaly connected everything. Travel records showed Delacroix making unpublicized trips to border regions in Texas and Arizona at intervals that matched, almost exactly, with spikes in missing persons reports across 4 Midwestern states. Each trip was documented as professional development or interstate coordination. Each trip lasted between 36 and 72 hours. Each trip preceded logistical activity that federal analysts would later identify as cartel transport windows. This was not corruption in the traditional sense. This was operational integration at a level that required years of planning and access that only a senior official could provide. The operation that federal agencies designated as Operation Winter Harvest began with a single intercepted communication. A text message containing no words, only coordinates and a timestamp sent from a burner phone to a number registered to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. When analysts cross-referenced the location against satellite imagery, they found what appeared to be a decommissioned grain storage facility on the outskirts of Davenport. County records listed it as pending demolition. No utilities were connected. No maintenance had been performed in over a decade. But thermal imaging revealed something different. The structure was generating heat signatures consistent with continuous human occupation. Not random, not chaotic, organized, scheduled. The patterns suggested shifts and rotations. The kind of activity that requires management. For 5 months, Federal surveillance teams documented everything. Delivery vehicles arriving between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m. on specific nights. Trucks with plates registered to 11 different states. Personnel who varied their entry points according to protocols that suggested professional tradecraft. And most significantly, the complete absence of local law enforcement presence within a 3-mile radius during these windows. Someone was clearing the path. Someone with authority over patrol schedules and response protocols. Someone who understood exactly when the area needed to be empty. The investigation expanded rapidly. ICE, DEA, FBI, DHS counterintelligence. What they were constructing was not merely a case against drug traffickers. It was a comprehensive map of institutional compromise that reached into the foundations of state governance itself. The snow had been falling since midnight, coating every surface with the kind of silence that makes sound travel strangely. At 4:12 a.m., beneath that frozen stillness, a convoy of unmarked vehicles moved through the industrial district east of Davenport. Headlights extinguished, engines running low. Inside were 284 federal agents, ICE tactical units, DHS strike teams, FBI operators who had spent months preparing for this moment. Their targets were not singular, 7 locations across 5 counties. Simultaneous breaches designed to prevent any element of the network from alerting the others. The timing had to be precise. The coordination had to be absolute. The primary site, designated Harvest Alpha, was the grain storage facility. Teams approached from 4 directions. Communication was minimal. Hand signals guided movement. The first breach charge detonated at exactly 4:12 a.m., collapsing a reinforced door inward with a sound that echoed across the empty industrial landscape. For 2 seconds, nothing moved. Then the gunfire erupted. From elevated positions inside the structure, armed enforcers opened fire with weapons that should never have been present in the Midwest. Military-grade automatic rifles, armor-piercing ammunition, the kind of hardware that the Sinaloa cartel deploys for territorial warfare in Sinaloa and Durango, not defensive operations in Iowa. Muzzle flashes cut through the darkness. Rounds sparked off steel beams as agents dove for cover behind industrial machinery. SWAT shields advanced in disciplined bursts. Commands pierced the chaos with the authority that comes only from exhaustive training and absolute conviction. The firefight lasted 2 minutes and 19 seconds. 3 agents sustained wounds. 1 was struck in the shoulder. Another took a round to the thigh. A third was knocked unconscious by debris from a shattered concrete pillar. Yet the line never broke. DHS marksmen positioned outside eliminated overhead lighting with precision fire, forcing the shooters to retreat deeper into the structure's interior. Within moments, tactical teams surged forward through the breach points. When the final shot faded, an oppressive silence returned. That was when agents heard it, a rhythmic tapping from behind a reinforced wall. Not mechanical, not random, human. Hydraulic cutters peeled back the false barrier, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was warm, humid, and saturated with the unmistakable scent of prolonged human confinement. Flashlights illuminated the truth 1 step at a time. The tunnel stretched nearly 800 feet, carved with precision and lined with sound-dampening material. Along its length were cramped chambers containing 226 captives. Many were sedated, others were bound. All were marked with identification numbers rather than names. The system had been designed to process people as inventory. Medical teams rushed past the tactical line with saline, blankets, oxygen, and the desperate urgency of professionals confronting horror they had trained for but never truly expected to see. Some victims had been underground for days. Others, investigators would later determine, had been held for months. Near the tunnel's far exit, agents discovered hastily abandoned documents, transport schedules, chemical manifests, routing instructions tied to rail networks crossing 9 states, and encrypted communications that would require weeks to fully decode. Among the seized materials was a single file that made veteran investigators pause. A document bearing Marcus Delacroix's encrypted authorization signature, directing the transfer of state correctional resources to an entity that did not officially exist. The simultaneous raids across Iowa's industrial corridor continued until dawn painted the snow-covered fields with pale winter light. By the time the sun had fully risen, federal agencies had assembled enough evidence to reconstruct nearly a decade of coordinated criminal enterprise. At Harvest Beta, a converted livestock processing facility near Cedar Rapids, agents discovered a fentanyl production operation that exceeded regional expectations by orders of magnitude. 2.1 million fentanyl pills, 53 kilograms of pure fentanyl powder, industrial mixing equipment capable of producing lethal doses at a scale that could have poisoned entire cities. The chemicals alone represented enough lethality to kill every resident of Iowa several times over. At Harvest Gamma, a shuttered packaging plant outside Des Moines, they found the financial architecture. servers containing records for 912 shell corporations, account numbers for financial institutions in 19 countries, transfer logs showing more than $510 million moving through channels disguised as agricultural investments, community development grants, and charitable contributions to organizations that existed only on paper. At Harvest Delta, near the Missouri border, the discovery was different. Not narcotics, not money, people. 51 individuals being held in conditions that violated every principle of human dignity. Workers from Central America who had been promised legal employment. Women from Southeast Asia who had been told they would find service industry jobs. Teenagers from rural Mexico who had been separated from families and sold into debt bondage that could never be repaid. The scale was staggering, but the precision was what disturbed investigators most. This was not opportunistic crime. This was infrastructure. This was logistics. This was a system designed to operate indefinitely without detection. And at the center of every authorization code, every transport schedule, every financial approval, was the same name: Marcus Delacroix. The man Iowa had trusted to oversee public safety had spent years converting that trust into a weapon aimed at the people he was sworn to protect. The cyber forensics team worked through consecutive nights in a secured federal facility that most Iowa residents did not know existed. Their objective was to penetrate the encryption protecting 19 servers seized during the raids. What they uncovered exceeded their most pessimistic projections. The network had been designated Project Silage. The operation had been architected from inception with a single strategic objective: establish a secure corridor through the American Midwest that could move narcotics, currency, and human cargo without triggering the federal oversight that scrutinized border states. The Sinaloa cartel had identified Iowa as the optimal location: minimal DEA presence, limited FBI field resources, a population that trusted its institutions with the unquestioning confidence of communities that had never been betrayed by them. Delacroix had been the primary architect. His position provided control over correctional facilities that could serve as staging areas and temporary holding locations. His authority over infrastructure oversight allowed him to influence maintenance schedules, creating windows when monitoring systems would be offline. His relationships with state legislators enabled him to shape policy in ways that created regulatory gaps precisely where the cartel required them. The financial structure demonstrated equal sophistication. The Heartland Community Foundation, a charity Delacroix had publicly championed for over a decade, served as the primary money laundering vehicle. Donations appeared to fund youth programs, disaster relief initiatives, and rural development projects. In reality, the money cycled through networks of shell corporations before returning as clean capital invested in legitimate businesses across 7 states. The corruption had metastasized far beyond one individual. Federal investigators identified 27 correctional officers who had received regular payments from cartel-connected accounts. 9 local law enforcement officials whose patrol routes had been systematically adjusted to avoid cartel transport windows. 4 county judges who had dismissed cases involving individuals later confirmed as network operatives. And a state legislator who had sponsored agricultural transportation bills that created precisely the regulatory gaps the cartel exploited for cross-state movement. This was not infiltration in any conventional sense. This was colonization. The Sinaloa cartel had not simply bribed officials. They had embedded themselves inside Iowa's governance structure and cultivated their presence there for nearly a decade, growing stronger with each passing year while the state remained oblivious. At 5:30 a.m. on a Thursday 3 days after the initial raids, federal command centers across 5 states activated simultaneously. On massive digital displays, red markers pulsed across Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, and Minnesota. Each marker represented a confirmed element of the Project Silage network. Each required immediate action. The operation that followed would become the largest coordinated law enforcement action in Midwestern history. More than 1,400 federal agents deployed across the region. SWAT teams, DEA tactical units, FBI field operators, ICE enforcement divisions, DHS counterintelligence specialists. Black Hawk helicopters provided aerial coordination. Armored vehicles secured perimeters. In border regions, coordination with CBP ensured that escape routes were sealed before the first breach charges detonated. The targets were comprehensive: supply lines, financial nodes, distribution points, communication hubs, everything that Project Silage had constructed over 9 years. In Texas, DEA teams struck a warehouse complex that served as the primary southern entry point for narcotic shipments. They seized 3.7 tons of cocaine, 940 kilograms of methamphetamine, and financial records linking the operation to banking entities across Central America and the Caribbean. In Illinois, FBI agents raided a trucking company that had been transporting modified shipping containers through the Midwest corridor for years. 31 drivers were arrested. Vehicle inspections revealed hidden compartments engineered to move both narcotics and human cargo across thousands of miles without triggering detection. In Arizona, a joint IC and Border Patrol operation intercepted a convoy approaching a tunnel entrance that connected to a distribution hub the cartel had believed was impenetrable. 18 cartel members were captured. The tunnel itself extended more than half a mile and was equipped with ventilation systems, electrical infrastructure, and rail mechanisms for moving product efficiently. At ports in Louisiana and Virginia, customs officials detained cargo vessels whose manifests had been systematically altered to conceal shipments connected to the Iowa network. By the operation's conclusion, agencies had seized 8.1 tons of narcotics, $94 million in cash, 923 weapons, and arrested 347 individuals across federal and state jurisdictions. The Sinaloa cartel's Midwest corridor had been dismantled in less than 72 hours of sustained operational pressure. But the human cost of what that corridor had enabled would require years to fully comprehend. The investigation into institutional compromise continued for weeks after the raids concluded. Forensic teams examined seized servers, transaction logs, patrol records, internal communications, and personnel files with methodical precision. What emerged was a portrait of systematic betrayal that extended far deeper than anyone had anticipated. The patterns were unmistakable. Border security protocols had been relaxed during specific windows that corresponded exactly with cartel transport schedules. Patrol grids had been falsified to create apparent coverage where none existed. Internal communications had been leaked to network operatives, allowing them to adjust routes and timing to avoid interception. 23 law enforcement officers across 4 agencies had received regular payments from accounts connected to Project Silage. Some had been recruited through financial pressure, others through compromising information. A few had been cartel affiliates from the beginning, placed into positions specifically to facilitate network operations. The emotional impact on honest officers was profound. Men and women who had dedicated careers to public service discovered that colleagues they had trusted, partners they had worked alongside, supervisors they had respected, had been actively undermining everything they believed they were protecting. One veteran sergeant, interviewed during the internal review process, described the revelation as feeling like the ground had shifted beneath everything he thought was solid. He had served for 22 years. He had believed in the institution. Now he questioned every case he had ever worked, wondering what had been allowed to slip through because someone above him had decided it should. Federal agents arrested 14 senior officers during the follow-up operations. Deputy chiefs, shift commanders, personnel coordinators. Each arrest sent ripples through departments that were already struggling to process the scope of the betrayal. The system that citizens had trusted was not merely compromised. It had been redesigned from within to serve interests that viewed those citizens as resources to be exploited rather than people to be protected. The 226 survivors rescued from the Iowa tunnels began providing testimony as medical teams worked to stabilize their conditions. Their accounts painted a picture that statistics alone could never capture. Many had arrived believing they were escaping poverty or violence in their home countries. They had been promised legitimate employment, safe housing, opportunities for their families. Instead, they were greeted with fabricated debts ranging from $12,000 to $65,000, amounts specifically calculated to ensure permanent compliance. Those who questioned the terms were separated and relocated to facilities where conditions were deliberately worse as punishment and warning. Several victims had crossed state borders more than a dozen times without ever appearing in official records. The system designed to track and protect them had been engineered to make them invisible. Among those rescued were 22 children. The youngest was 6 years old. Some had been transported in modified rail containers, spending days in darkness alongside sealed packages of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Medical assessments documented oxygen deprivation, chemical exposure, malnutrition, and developmental trauma caused by prolonged confinement without adequate light, nutrition, or human contact. One survivor, a woman who had been held for 14 months, said during her interview that she had stopped believing rescue was possible. She had assumed that whatever system was supposed to find people like her had either forgotten they existed or been paid to look elsewhere. The investigation confirmed she was not wrong about the second possibility. 53 cases that should have triggered federal alerts had been flagged as resolved in state databases without any actual resolution. 21 missing persons reports had been marked as voluntary departures despite evidence indicating otherwise. The system had not simply failed. It had been manipulated to manufacture silence where there should have been alarm. The scope of Project Silage extended far beyond Iowa's borders. As investigators mapped the network's full architecture, they discovered a Continental operation that had utilized the Midwest as a central hub for distribution across the entire eastern United States. The logistics had been designed for invisibility. Modified rail containers moved through freight corridors crossing 14 states. Shipping manifests were altered at specific way stations where personnel had been compromised or maintenance schedules had been manipulated to create oversight gaps. trucking routes deliberately avoided jurisdictions with active DEA presence or robust inspection protocols. The financial architecture demonstrated equal sophistication. Agricultural investment funds disguised the movement of cartel capital across state lines. Charitable foundations processed payments that appeared to support community programs but actually compensated network operatives throughout the corridor. Real estate transactions in 9 states converted drug proceeds into legitimate property holdings that generated ongoing revenue streams. The human trafficking component operated in parallel with the narcotics pipeline. Victims moved through the same corridors, sometimes in the same containers, frequently arriving at facilities that served dual purposes as drug distribution points and holding locations for individuals being transported to final exploitation destinations. Federal analysts estimated that at peak capacity, the network moved approximately 4.3 tons of narcotics annually through routes that should have been among the most secure in the nation. The revenue generated exceeded $500 million yearly. The human cost was measured in thousands of lives destroyed, families shattered, communities poisoned. The final phase of Delacroix's plan, documented in encrypted files recovered from seized servers, revealed ambitions that extended far beyond current operations. The objective was to transform Iowa into a permanent logistics headquarters for Sinaloa cartel operations throughout the American Midwest and Northeast. A shadow infrastructure embedded so deeply within legitimate systems that it could operate indefinitely regardless of political changes or law enforcement priorities. The cartel had not simply infiltrated American institutions. They had begun redesigning them for a future in which their operations would be indistinguishable from legitimate commerce. The arrest of Marcus Delacroix triggered institutional disruption that rippled across Iowa's state government for months. Federal audit teams descended on departments that had operated without meaningful scrutiny for years. The results documented systemic failures at every level. 78 administrative files were immediately frozen pending investigation. 14 department heads were placed on administrative leave. More than 500 dormant cases were reopened after analysts discovered systematic irregularities in how they had been processed and closed. The impact on daily life was immediate and measurable. In the 4 weeks following the raids, fentanyl-related overdoses across Iowa declined by 44%. Emergency room administrators initially believed their reporting systems had malfunctioned. The reduction was too sudden, too dramatic, to be explained by anything other than the catastrophic disruption of supply networks. Freight companies quietly suspended certain rail routes after discovering their infrastructure had been weaponized for criminal purposes. Corporate compliance officers who had certified shipments without adequate inspection faced questioning from federal regulators and internal review boards. Inside government offices, the atmosphere transformed from routine administration to institutional reckoning. Officials who had spent careers assuming their colleagues shared their commitment to public service now understood that assumption had been dangerously naive. The colleague in the next office might have been compromised. The supervisor who approved their requests might have been facilitating the very crimes they were trying to prevent. 5 senior administrators resigned without explanation within weeks of the raids becoming public. 3 requested immediate transfers to positions in other states. 2 declined to speak with investigators and retained legal counsel before the first questions were asked. The system Iowans had trusted was not merely compromised. It had been systematically redesigned from within to serve interests that regarded citizens as commodities rather than constituents, as resources to be exploited rather than people to be protected. What unfolded in Iowa was more than the dismantling of a criminal network. It was a warning about what happens when trust becomes absolute and vigilance becomes optional. The raids concluded in hours. The recovery will require years, perhaps generations. Institutions that communities relied upon were revealed to be compromised at levels no one had imagined possible. Families who believed their towns were sanctuaries learned that danger had been operating within the very systems designed to shield them. Officials who had been honored for their service were exposed as architects of exploitation who had betrayed every principle their positions were meant to embody. Power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it grows in silence. Sometimes it wears the face of authority and public service. Sometimes it relies entirely on the assumption that certain places are too ordinary, too distant from danger, too fundamentally trusted to ever become battlegrounds. The Sinaloa cartel understood this. They constructed their American corridor not in the border cities where scrutiny was highest, but in the heartland where scrutiny was virtually non-existent. Marcus Delacroix understood this as well. He spent nearly 2 decades building a reputation that made questioning him seem unnecessary, even disloyal. For 9 years, that reputation shielded an operation that moved hundreds of millions in narcotics and destroyed hundreds of lives while operating in plain sight. The 226 survivors now face years of recovery. Some will carry physical consequences of their captivity for the remainder of their lives. Others will struggle with psychological wounds that leave no visible marks but shape every waking moment. The youngest among them may never fully understand what was taken from them during the months they spent in darkness beneath Iowa's frozen fields. The families who spent months not knowing what had happened to missing loved ones now have answers. But answers bring grief as often as they bring relief. Closure is not the same as healing. The citizens of Iowa now understand that the safety they assumed was not a guarantee. It was a responsibility. A responsibility that requires constant attention, institutional accountability, and the willingness to question even those who appear most trustworthy. Especially those who appear most trustworthy. If you are still here, if you have followed this story to its conclusion, share it so others understand what silence can cost. If you believe that corruption at any level must be confronted and exposed, let your voice be heard. If you want these investigations to continue reaching the audiences who need to understand them, stay engaged with the stories that matter. This account is a fictional dramatization inspired by real challenges facing communities across America. The names of officials and specific operational details have been created for narrative purposes. But the threats depicted, cartel infiltration of American institutions, systemic corruption within governance structures, human trafficking networks operating in plain sight, and the weaponization of public trust against the very people that trust was meant to protect, are dangers that every citizen should understand. Vigilance is not optional. It is a civic duty. And silence is never safety. It is only permission for those who would exploit it.